Willkommen in einem Video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 32 of my figure gaming video series. In this video, I'll be covering basing commanders, generals, leaders, or headquarters. I suspect this may be one of my more esoteric videos, but it's an issue I did face, and the solution to that issue has been more difficult than I originally expected. How should I base my generals, commanders, leaders, or headquarters? This issue spans all periods and scales I game in, which ranges from 15mm, 6mm Ancients, 15mm and 6mm Napoleonics, and 6mm World War II and Cold War, and 10mm Cold War or World War II as well. The rules I commonly use do require your commanders to be based separately. If the commander is a combat unit, or it's simply a marker with no combat capacity, then maybe it's not such an issue. In some cases, rules do not require a commander, in which case there is no issue and there's probably no point continuing with this video. But if you need to base specific commanders, then carry on. Possibly my first commanders or general elements were for my ancient 15mm armies using WRG 6th and 7th edition, possibly even 5th edition, as well as other rules such as Anabasis and Rapax. This all occurred in the early 1980s. In this case, my generals consisted of a single, normally mounted figure on a small base. In most cases, this was 1.5 centimetres wide by 3 centimetres deep, or half a mounted element. If the general was on foot, it would be a 1.5 centimetre square. I used the same commander basing system with my early Napoleonics games, specifically 15mm. Incidentally, I no longer have any figures based in this manner, so the examples I'm showing are from the internet. When we moved to World War II and Cold War, particularly 6mm, I originally based my headquarters elements as if they were infantry elements, normally on a 3 centimetre square base. To distinguish the elements, I ensured the figures on the element were in some ways unique. Normally a vehicle was included. This was all in the past. When I re-entered the hobby more than 10 years ago, I began to notice some players base their headquarters on round bases. I've seen this elsewhere where the round base was a coin, with a figure based on it. Initially, I did not like this idea, and while I noted it, I never really seriously considered adopting it. During my experimentation and playtest sessions with the Lost Battle rules, I used 6mm figures, which I did not personally own and which my opponent normally provided. The force mix included all the generals being based on round bases. Initially, I did not think much about this, but one thing I did notice during my many grueling games was the round bases made identifying the commanders really, really easy. When I started to refight historical Napoleonic battles using a high element density set of rules, such as Napoleon at War or equivalent Grosse Schlachten, I began to notice that finding my commanders quickly on the playing area became rather difficult, and I kept on missing them. It was after many of these types of games that I thought about using round bases for my commanders so I could more easily identify them. For my first experiment, I decided to adopt it for a brand new Napoleonic 6mm force mix, and in this case I decided to use round bases for the commanders. And when I started playtesting, it made it so easy to find my commanders, I was totally bought in to the system and decided to adopt the same process for all my other force mixes. One issue I had was that some rules require the commander to be mounted on a combat element, such as DBM, M, DBM, etc. In this case, I've already created my special general or commander elements, and I'm not going to update or change it because that's simply the way the rules require. However, in the future, for new armies, I will consider creating a general on a round element to act as a marker, which I then place with a combat element, which is basically, as DBMM requires, a combat element with a commander, because I really do like the idea of putting commanders on round elements. In addition to rules such as DBMM, etc., there are many other rules, such as a set of rules which I'm using quite a bit lately, P17CW. They are very simple rules. In these rules, the rulers are markers and have no intrinsic combat values, which suits the round bases perfectly. Lost battles is another example. When we move to Napoleonics, the same applies with my 15mm Napoleonic force mixers. These days I often use a set of rules such as Napoleon at War or Grosse Schlachten, or rules such as BBNB, so the round bases for a command element works perfectly. This kind of shows the reason why I've adopted the circular command basing system. It makes it easier to set up a game and to play a game. In this example, one base is the commander, which is slightly darker. You can identify this if you really try, but it takes some effort. In reality, the commander element is so similar to a mounted element, it's even hard to find them in this example. In this case, the commander is now round, and even though it's the same colour as the combat units, can easily be identified. This also applies to the storage solution used for your force mix. With commanders on a square or rectangular base, I find it hard to find the commanders when setting up and hard to, well actually even pack them up, and hard to identify them on the playing area when determining if the commanders are providing command control across my army or not. Now, I'm uncertain why I never really liked the round-based system initially. I suspect it's because it's based on a coin, or at least the early examples I saw were based on a coin. As I travel across many countries, I need to select a coin from one country, and I hope I have access to the coin type when I go to another country. A Japanese 10 yen coin is what I would probably have used, but as I now no longer work in Japan, I would have to consider what to replace it with. So the coin system, maybe it works reasonably well if you don't move around, but if you move around, it may not be that good. You also have to consider, can you find a coin which is the correct size? My other issue with using coins is flocking it. As the coin is metal, I always felt any flocking would not stay on the coin. I've been told this is not an issue, but it was certainly something which I was at least originally worried about. However, these days I can get a laser cut 2mm and 3mm circular base. This also allows me to align my round bases with the basing system I currently use for all my combat elements. For my armies which use a 3cm wide element or base, I use a 3cm circular base for the CNC and a 2cm circular base for the sub-commander. For my 4cm wide element based armies, I use a 4cm circular base for the CNC and a 3cm circular base for the sub-commander. This is a rather short video. In some ways it may be considered a rather trivial topic, but I generally create videos when I have a gaming issue that needs to be solved. This could range from finding a suitable simple set of rules for a specific period and scale which will help me introduce the hobby to new players, to creating scenarios for more experienced players and using more complex rules. The basing of commander issue is not a major one, but it has annoyed me for quite a few years. I went through a period of playing with rules which did not use commanders, but now I'm back to rules which do use commanders, and that issue once again began to raise its ugly head. In my last game, where I had commanders on square or rectangular sets of or bases, I kept on losing track of my commanders and ended up having some elements out of command control at a critical point in time. I suffered a marginal loss in that case, although not as a result of a lack of command control. Putting that aside, I'm now determined to rebase all my leaders, commanders, generals and headquarters on round bases, and I've pretty much done so. So we come to an end of episode 32 of my figure gaming hobby series of videos, in this case providing an overview of, at least in my opinion, how to base commanders, leaders, generals and headquarters. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.